All right, guys. What I want to do is I want to go over a couple of things here with you. I noticed that many of you were struggling with counting atoms. So let's kind of take a step back. All right. So on your periodic table, you have what are called elements. And elements usually have one letter or two. And you'll notice that the first letter is always capitalized. If it has a second letter, the second letter is always going to be lowercase. So those are examples of elements, okay? If you take a look at this one, I have a capital and a lowercase. That means it's one element. But if I do this, I have two capital letters, which means they're separate, which means I have two elements that have combined. We actually call this a compound, okay? So to know if it's a compound or not, you have two or more elements that have combined. So a quick way to do that is count capital letters. Focused. Okay, so here we have two capital letters, which means we have two or more elements, which means this is a compound. This only has one capital letter, which means it's an element. One capital letter, these are elements. What we want to do is we want to look at a compound here for a second. And these compounds, they represent substances. For example, H2O is water. Now the compound tells us two things. It tells us what elements make up water. We have hydrogen and oxygen. And then it tells us how many atoms there are per element. So here's what we do. If there's a little tiny number called a subscript, okay, let me do this. That subscript tells us how many atoms there are, and the subscript is going to follow the element, okay? So hydrogen has two atoms that make up the element hydrogen, okay? Every element in the compound is going to have a subscript, but if you notice here, there is no number. It's invisible, okay? If it's invisible, it's a 1. So anytime there is no subscript, it's a 1. So we have one atom of oxygen. So let's look at another one. We have CO2. Because I have two capital letters, I have two elements. I have carbon and I have oxygen. If you look, every element is going to have a subscript, but this one is invisible. So it's a 1. Oxygen has 2. Okay, so what we're doing, this is called counting atoms. Let's try another one. Okay, if you count the capital letters, we have one capital letter, 2, and 3. Remember what I said, if it has a second letter, the second letter is lowercase. So we have capital F, lowercase e, that's one element. We have a capital here and a capital here, they're separate. So we have S and we have O. Fe, which is iron, has a subscript of 2, so we have 2 atoms of iron. There is no subscript, so it's an invisible 1, and we have 4 atoms of oxygen. Let's try one more. All right, if you look at this one, we have two capital letters. There's a capital K and a capital C. Don't get confused on this. That might look like a capital I, but it's a lowercase l, that is chlorine. So we have two elements. We have Kr and Cl. Kr has no subscript, so it's a 1. And then Cl has 6. Okay? Now, one last thing. They could ask you, how many elements do you have? We have 3 elements. But how many atoms? 4 plus 1 is 5, plus 2 is 7. I hope that helps.